Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet meeting of East Renfrewshire Council on Thursday, 12th of October. First item on the agenda is report apologies for absence. We've got Councillor Devlin.
From Councillor Devlin, Chair.
Okay, thank you. No declarations of interest? No. So we'll move on to the third item of the agenda, which is Strategic Housing Investment Plan 24-29, and Phil Dawes will be taking us through this. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for the proposed Strategic Housing Investment Plan from 24-25 and its submission to the Scottish Government. It's a report that comes to Council every year, but it is still quite a complicated report with various acronyms, so it can be difficult to understand sometimes. The Scottish Government requires local authorities to supplement their local housing strategy with what's called a Strategic Housing Investment Plan, which sets out the detail of the Council's affordable housing investment priorities, and it details a programme for delivering this with our partners for the next 5 years. It details the number of homes that will be built, where they will be built, and who the developer will be. Social housing represents only 12% of all homes in the council area, and the authority has an expensive housing market that is inaccessible to many people, and therefore the SHIP is very important. Although it's a complicated report, its essence is the appendix, and this is quite simple, so I will take people through the appendix. And if we look, for example, at the first line, it details a project at Commercial Road, where the developer will be the council. 49 units will be delivered for both general users and for wheelchair users. It will be available for social rent, and then the figures for each year details how much money will be spent each year. And then, for example, if you look at the next one, which is Walton Street, there the developer will be Barhead Housing Association. It will also be available for social rent. I would just note three things, because I'm aware that as a Cabinet we discussed the issue of homelessness maybe a month ago and the importance of building more homes. To build more homes, one requires three things, which is land, money and infrastructure. Just to talk members through that, members should be aware that the SHIP programme is sometimes heavily reliant on private landowners. We have a affordable housing policy that says, for example, if a private landowner is going to build 100 homes, we have a 25% affordable housing contribution, so up to 25% of those will be affordable, possibly available for social rent or for mid-market rent, but we are dependent upon when those landowners build on those sites, so we aren't always in control of the timescale. Secondly, in relation to money, and paragraphs 13 to 16 of the report touch upon that, social house building needs to wash its face from a financial perspective. If one assumes it costs £200,000 to build a property, assuming that the land is free, we receive around £83,000 in subsidy from the Scottish Government. So therefore, as a council, we would need to borrow the £117,000 to pay the balance. We need to pay that money back. It is funded out of rent, and the rents need to be affordable. So if we have a situation where the cost of materials and labour increase, and due to interest rates the cost of borrowing increases, obviously the amount of money we need to pay back will increase, but sometimes our capacity to increase the rent to offset that is limited, because we need to ensure that the rents are affordable for the people that will move into the homes. Obviously, in recent years, the context of increasement development cost per unit, trade and material shortages and the increase in interest rates has posed significant concerns, not just for us but for all other social landlords across Scotland. And the third issue that we need to tackle is that of infrastructure. So it's not just about building homes. We need to ensure, for example, that there's sufficient provision in the local schools to accommodate the children that will move into those homes. And sometimes there are other infrastructure requirements as well. So if we think about Barhead Road in Newton Mearns, which is on the SHIP, we would need to install a signalised junction in order to provide access to any of the vehicles for the homes that will be built there. If we think about Belgrayston, which is the subject of the Cabinet paper coming up next, It wasn't there just a question of building homes. We needed to build an access road, we needed to build a pumping station to deliver water to the homes, and we needed to provide a electrical supply to the homes, because previously it was just land, it was just open field, and there wasn't any electrical supply. We are currently working with colleagues in roads and planning to explore all the land in the council ownership that could be developed and built upon in the future, and I'm happy to recommend the report to Cabinet and take any questions that there may be.
Thank you very much, Phil, for a comprehensive report. Councillor Bracknell.
Thanks. It's great to see a focus on accessible and wheelchair accessible properties. I think we're definitely lacking those in East Renfrewshire, so it's great to see that. I've got a question about mid-market rent. How are these rents set? So what exactly is, I kind of get there is like a happy medium between social rent and then private renting. So how do you set the kind of rent, the rent for those properties? Because it seems like it's kind of, no one's quite sure what's classed as mid-market rent.
For social housing, the rent will be set by the individual landlords. So, for example, we will set it based on our current rental levels. To get the grant funding, however, the Scottish Government has caps on the rent that is allowed to be set. So when set the rent, we will review our existing rents against that cap. Mid-market is slightly different. A business case has to be established and mid-market essentially is the difference between the private sector and social housing is its simplest terms. In looking at mid-market rent, that's a business case that the landlord would have to establish before setting that rent.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks for the report. Phil, the first question is really about achievability and our intentions. And given the markets and you hear about house prices now going down, and developers, I think, complaining about the squeeze in their margins. Obviously, they're commercial; they want to make money. And in terms of getting the 25%, and it's really just do you anticipate that things are going to get more difficult for us in terms of being able to do achieve what we're putting out in this plan?
I think in terms of builders pushing back against the 25% affordable housing contribution, I don't think that's going to be our most significant challenge. So I don't necessarily have a huge concern in that area. I mean, builders are always trying to push against it because they're obviously in the business to make profit, and from their perspective, the less affordable housing there is, the greater profit that they can make. But we have a very robust process in relation to our discussions with builders, and actually I was discussing with one of the private builders on the SHIP programme at the moment just this morning. So we do have quite robust discussions, but I think that building houses is still quite profitable. So I think there's still a financial incentive for builders to build houses even with the 25% affordable housing contribution.
Okay, thanks. Second question, you touched on infrastructure. And you talked about utilities and power and etc. and pumping stations. In terms of statutory obligations from Scottish Water or any the energy companies to provide those, I mean, where does the responsibility of the who has the ultimately? Is it something that we have to take the lead on, or are they not? If we potentially share our plans with them, are they not under an obligation to deliver at all?
They don't. I don't think they have an obligation to do certain things to deliver affordable housing. We do work quite closely with Scottish Power Energy Networks and with Scottish Water, and I think our working relationships are getting closer and getting better as we become more experienced as a council at building houses. We obviously, sometimes you encounter things for the first time, but as we build more and more sites, we are developing our experience and skill set and strengthening our relationships. So a lot of these sites are a challenge, and a lot of organisations like Scottish Water and Scottish Power Energy Networks are also under a lot of pressures. And I think, for example, the Balgrayson site that I spoke about wasn't just building the houses, it was the the road network, it was the water provision, it was the electrical provision, and all of this, it needed to be funded, the works needed to be ordered in a logical, sequential structure. So there is a lot of work involved in getting these sites up and running, and it can sometimes, to a member of the public, be underestimated how much work is involved in turning an open field into a housing estate. A housing estate. There's a lot of work involved in transforming a piece of open space into an area where you might have 30 or 40 homes.
In terms of obviously then participation from the Scottish Government, if they approve this, in terms of like their ability to work at that level with Scottish Water and the energy networks as well, again, should they not have some contribution in?
There's obviously been a lot of discussion in the national media in the last few weeks about house building across the United Kingdom as a whole, and I do think there are areas where national governments can intervene to make it easier to deliver housing in local authority areas, because some of the, if I use the word obstacles or challenges that we face, are faced by all of the 32 local authorities across Scotland. So sometimes there could be things put in place on a national level that would make it easier for local authorities to build houses. But that said, I do appreciate the constraints that both, for example, there's a limited electrical capacity within the national grid within the United Kingdom at the moment. So just because we desire to build houses in a certain area doesn't mean that Scottish Power and Energy Networks have the capacity to provide an electrical supply to those houses. So therefore, the two organisations need to work together to overcome those challenges.
Okay, I agree with you there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Anderson. If there's no other questions, a couple from myself. Really welcome the extra 600 houses over the next 5 years. That will be warmly welcomed by the people of East Renfrewshire. Much needed. And you're right to reference the homelessness crisis that we currently have and dealing with, and this will help to some extent, but not eradicate it. A few questions relating to that. So 600 is what you know about and what is potential. Is there any capacity beyond that within LDP2? Any potential there? Within the housing that you've identified, given that it's within LDP2, I'm assuming there's no additional pressures on education places and schools. If you could confirm that. The third question is really relating to the mix. So it was hard to be precise on this when looking at the analysis between the Leven Valley and Eastwood side. The Eastwood side looked quite light, 150, so it might be more. And we know we've got a huge shortage of housing on the Eastwood side. So I wonder if you could comment on that and what more we can potentially do on the Eastwood side. Thank you.
Okay. Taking the last question first, it is the case that the pressure on the Eastwood side is the greatest. If I was to say, for example, 2/3 of the local authority's population is on the Eastwood side of the authority, and about 3/4 of our social housing stock is on the Leven Valley side of the authority, so there's obviously a mismatch. And one of the reports I will touch upon later today is about the number of people that refuse an offer of housing when they are given it, and that's because we have a lot of households on the Eastwood side of the authority that wish to stay on the Eastwood side of the authority, but if they want social housing, have to move to the Leven Valley. We as a council own a lot less land on the Eastwood side of the authority, which makes it very difficult for us, as I said before, to control those sites. So linking that to your first question, that's why I made the point. We're looking at all of our sites, both large and small, of land that we own in the council area. So, for example, we have a variety of kind of small pieces of land dotted about the authority, which may only accommodate 3 or 4 homes. So we are looking at the viability of building on those sites. 2 potential obstacles are, one, if you are, rather than building 40 houses on one site, if you build 4 houses on 10 sites separately, you don't have the economies of scale, so the affordability issue can come into play. Secondly, some of these sites can be landlocked or don't have appropriate transport access, so we're working with roads colleagues to look at those issues. So we have a working group within the council which involves colleagues from housing, planning and roads to address all of those issues. In relation to education pressures, what we would do is any site before it came on, we would have a further check with colleagues in education to ensure that capacity in the schools exists, because obviously all of these calculations have already been undertaken, but it's a dynamic situation in terms of families moving in and out of local areas. So because a school had capacity a number of years ago doesn't automatically mean it will have capacity in a few years' time. So those calculations will be constantly refreshed.
Phil, that's very helpful. Just going back to the capacity issue. So what is the maximum capacity remaining under LDP2? If we're going for 600, but what is the maximum in the plans for LDP2?
Don't think we approach it in that manner and have that kind of figure. I can go and speak to planning colleagues about that, but I'm not sure that there would be a numerical figure attached to which would enable me to answer your question, but I may be wrong, so I'll seek clarification.
Okay, thanks. Look forward to a response on that. Great. So if there are no other questions on this topic, so we go to the recommendations. So Cabinet is asked to approve the East Renfrewshire Strategic Housing Investment Plan 24-29 for submission to Scottish Government by 27th of October, and B, note the significant pressures for additional affordable housing to meet the needs of residents and the contribution that the SHIP programme makes in addressing this. We agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much, Phil. Much appreciated. So moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is, sorry, bear with me, which is New Council Housing Contract Variation Report by, is it you again, Phil? By Phil Dawes. Thank you, Phil.
The purpose of this report is to advise of a breach in contract standing orders and request that a variation be approved by Cabinet retrospectively. I do wish to add a caveat: it's of a possible or potential breach in contract standing orders, and I will explain that. CCG were approved to undertake the design and build of 4 sites. First 3 sites were completed pre-COVID in 2019, and the 4th and final site was at Balgrayson, which was the site I referenced earlier, which was completed in June 2022. As paragraph 7 notes, the contract awarded to CCG was for £7,472,000. However, the final account notice has indicated that the final contract value may be £7,614,000, which would be an overspend of £141,000. Now, Contract Standing Orders Clause 14 notes that any variation that is greater than £100,000 must be reported to Cabinet for approval prior to the variation being instructed. Now, that £141,000 has 2 component parts. The first relates to additional requests made by us as a council, which totaled £66,000. That, for example, included the 6 wheelchair adapted properties, and wheelchair adapted properties cost more money, so therefore there was a variation of £66,000. The second component is a loss and expenses claim of £75,000, which was submitted by the contractor due to a delay in the development. That is currently being assessed by legal services. If the legal loss and expense claim is rejected, then the amount of the variation is £66,000, which is below £100,000 and therefore isn't a breach of contract standing orders, hence my phrasing of it's a possible or potential breach. If the loss and expenses claim is approved, and if it's approved in full, then the overspend would be £141,000 and therefore it would be a breach. Obviously, if the loss and expenses claim was partially accepted, and that partial acceptance was around £33,000 or less, then again, it wouldn't be a breach. Nonetheless, it was felt necessary to bring this to Cabinet. Paragraph 9 notes there aren't any immediate financial implications associated with the report, as budgetary provision does exist. to pay for the £141,000 should the loss and expenses claim be approved, and as such I'm happy to recommend this report to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Phil. Any questions on this, Councillor Anderson?
Thanks, Leader. And thanks for that, actually, more detail. You, I think, partially answered what my question was going to be about how it broke down and the two parts to A and B and the loss and expense claim, the 33,000, 75,000. And obviously the thing that caught my eye immediately and then further reading is the brackets subject to finalised legal assessment of contractual liability. I realise there's no one here from legal at the moment, but the likelihood, are we going to contest it, or are we going to accept we've accepted part of it, but you know, when will we know what the final decision is?
I think because it's subject to legal scrutiny at the moment, my preference would be not to answer that question, because it may compromise our negotiations. So if you don't mind, I'll decline to answer if that's
well, I appreciate that. But can we, from legal, when will we know from them? Because it's obviously ultimately their decision.
Well, I think legal services will look at it. It depends upon the protracted nature of the negotiations. It would be difficult, I think, to put a timescale on it. It depends how many points are going to be disputed between the two sides. So I think it would be imprudent to put a timescale upon it.
Well, I suppose ultimately, but actually, yeah, no consultation. I'm just looking at what we're being asked to. We're asked to note this anyway, so I'm sure. Well, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Phil, thanks for Councillor Pragnall. You okay? Phil, just want to confirm 8A, the additional requests. So this is stuff we needed to do anyway to make these capable for disabled access. Is that correct? So this is, we may not have signed the right form, but it's stuff that we would have had to do anyway.
That's correct, yes. There's also additional drainage and acoustic measures that were required. That's noted in the final sentence of paragraph 8A, but yes, it was necessary works.
Great. And just on this loss and expense claim, I understand this arose because of COVID and delays in construction, which is to be expected, as we know lots of construction shut down completely for extended periods of time. Do we have, maybe again this is an issue out with this meeting, insurance cover for that? So perhaps maybe that's one to come back on later from legal due diligence on this.
I mean, I do recall these questions being asked at a council meeting, I think around 2020, in relation to some of the construction projects that were ongoing. Because COVID was unprecedented, most legal contracts didn't anticipate such a scenario where, for example, en masse construction companies were told to pack up and go home and didn't have access to the site. We use the Scottish standard building contract for our contract, so we don't use a contract particularly unique to East Renfrewshire. We use the industry standard contract. I have no doubt that the various terms of those contracts are being constantly revised to take into lessons learned as a nation from COVID.
Okay, thanks for that. Before we get to the recommendations, you refer to potential breaches, because we're not quite there yet. So in terms of the recommendation, does that need to be amended to say the Cabinet is asked to note potential breaches or breaches? Just, maybe it's being pedantic, but can we clarify that, if we need to amend that or not?
I don't think it's pedantic. I think potential would be more prudent, because if the financial loss and expense claim is rejected, then it isn't a breach if it's accepted.
You're happy with that as well? Great. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So unless there's any other questions, then can we go to the recommendation, which is the Cabinet is asked to note potential breaches in contract standing orders with regards to contract value variations of up to £141,397, subject to finalised legal assessment of contractual liability. Are we happy with that? Agreed. Thank you very much, Phil. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5, and it is the Housing Services Annual Performance Report 22-23 and Assurance Statement, Scottish Social Housing Charter. And this is Phil again. Thank you, Phil.
Okay. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for the Annual Assurance Statement 2023. This, like the SHIP, is also a report that comes to Cabinet every year, and like the SHIP, it also has lots of acronyms and is sometimes not the easiest to understand. The report outlines the housing services compliance with 1, the Scottish Housing Regulators Regulatory Framework, 2, the Scottish Social Housing Charter standards, and 3, our statutory obligations. The Scottish Social Housing Charter, which I just mentioned, requires each landlord to provide the Scottish Housing Regulator with details of their performance against 37 performance indicators and 32 contextual indicators, and this is known as the Annual Return on the Charter, ARC. As I say, a report on this matter has been submitted to Cabinet each year since its introduction in 2013-14. Paragraph 9 notes that the performance reports against the Scottish Social Housing Charter Appendix 1 means we are performing well in key areas in comparison to last year and also above average for the housing sector in Scotland. The highlights of the performance are set out below, and paragraphs 12 to 15 note that. So for example, repairs, maintenance, empty homes and rent arrears, we are performing well. So for example, in relation to rent arrears, we've reduced our gross rent arrears to 7.6%. In relation to empty homes, we've reduced our rent loss for the second successive year. And whereas it's at 1.8% in 2021, it's now 0.95% in 22-23 of rent due. If one were to look at Appendix 1, there was a kind of traffic light system. So green indicates a good performance, so you'll see, thankfully, more greens than reds. You will see a red against the percentage of properties meeting the Scottish Housing Quality Standard at year end. Just to explain that, the condition of our homes against the Scottish Housing Quality Standard has been affected by our compliance with what's known as the renewal of electrical installation condition reports. This was also reported to Cabinet last year. Previously, electrical installation condition reports needed to be available every 10 years. They now need to be available every 5 years. So that has meant a dip in our standard as we've needed to catch up from a procurement perspective to go out and inspect, do the electrical installation condition reports for all of our properties. But we are back on track, and next year we'll be back in the high 90s because we have caught up. Many other landlords have faced similar dips, and it has been a challenge to get those certificates back in place, particularly as it was introduced at the tail end of COVID. The second area that I would bring to your attention, which is housing options and access to housing, which is the percentage of tenancy officers refused, which is a red. Now, I alluded to that in the SHIP report, and the issue that we have is, although we have a choice-based letting system where applicants can choose which home they want to bid for, if a person's made a homeless presentation, if they haven't bid by a certain time, we need to make a direct offer to them. The challenge that we have, as I explained earlier, given that two-thirds of the population on the eastward side of the authority, 3/4 of our stock are on the Leven Valley side of the authority, we frequently end up in a position where we have to make a bid to an offer to people in an area that isn't of their choosing. Because there is an appeal system, people will tend to refuse their offer and appeal, and I think that explains the percentage of tenancy officers refused. The report does contain an action plan of areas where we wish to seek improvement. Seeking improvement doesn't mean necessarily that we are performing poorly. So, for example, I mentioned our good performance in relation to rent arrears, but we still put that on the service improvement plan because we want to improve better there. Homelessness, as we have spoken about, is a continuing issue for us as a council. Well, that will be subject to a separate report due to come to Cabinet soon, and I'm happy to recommend the report to Cabinet.
Phil, thank you very much for a very comprehensive report. Any questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Leader. Yep, just echo that. Excellent report, and very encouraging to see lots of good things and good signs going on there, especially in regards to servicing and our tenants, and and maintaining and looking after things. I think and I acknowledge, and actually this is what my question is about, is where the goalposts get moved, and something that previously was a 10 years regime to changes to 5, but as you said, we're catching up with that. At a previous cabinet meeting, we also discussed energy standards and them potentially changing and moving in the near future with the Scottish Government, and it was affecting our potential installation of new equipment, particularly in that area. Does that mean then that we might see again us falling below at the moment with the energy standards? We're performing well, but will we possibly see a dip in the future because they're about to change? I know you don't know what they're going to be yet, I think, but can you give us an idea?
Not necessarily, because obviously it will apply to all local authorities, and often performance is judged not just in absolute terms but in relative terms compared to our peers. And the social housing sector tends to be split into two. You've got housing associations and you've got the 26 local authorities out of the 32 that have retained their stock. The Scottish Government haven't yet come to a conclusion. It's each 2 you are referring to, energy efficiency in Scottish social homes. That's due to be, needs to be in place by 2032, but that is being revised. I don't think it will necessarily impact upon our standing, because I think it will apply to everybody. It will be a challenge to meet, particularly in mixed tenure properties. So if we, for example, had a 4 in a block where we own all of the properties, for us to deal with, for example, insulation or putting on a new roof, it's within our gift. If we had a similar 4 in a block where we had 2 owner-occupiers and 2 council tenants, if the owner-occupiers were unwilling or unable to participate and our factoring title conditions didn't permit us to enforce it, then that could pose a problem. And even if we did have the legal authority to enforce it, if an owner can't afford it, then it could be considered punitive to enforce an owner-occupier to do something which, whilst beneficial, is financially prohibitive for them. So I don't have a significant concern that will cause a problem for us as a council, particularly vis-à-vis the others.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks very much, Phil. Any other questions? No. Phil, welcome this report, particularly the detail on the action plan and what you're doing to improve on various items. I'd just like to pay attention to that percentage of tenancy offers refused. I'm sure other members here on the Eastwood side are seeing a lot of that, and it's all down to lack of stock and lack of availability of housing in the Eastwood side. So that's going to be a measure that's going to be, let's be realistic, very, very difficult to improve significantly anytime soon until we have more housing stock. Would that be sort of fair?
I think so, yes. It's the location that's the big issue. In terms of suitability of homes, the Scottish Social Housing Quality Standard means that council homes are in good condition. We, as a council, have the mixed tenure scheme, which is good for improving the external kind of furniture and appearance of our homes, but the location of the home is a problem.
Thank you very much. So if there's no other questions, we'll go to the recommendations in the report. And it is recommended that the Cabinet note performance for 22-23 against SSHC indicators and measures in comparison to the previous year in wider housing sector. B, note the action plan to continue to strengthen our compliance against the regulatory framework and SSHC. And C, approve the 2023 annual assurance statement of our compliance with the regulatory framework and SSHC standards and its submission to the Scottish Housing Regulator. Are we happy with that? Agreed. Thank you very much, Phil. Are you off the hook now? Right, so now moving on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is licensing of short-term lets. Report by Suzanne Conlon. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. The purpose of the report is to amend the existing Council's short-term let licensing policy following a change to Scottish Government guidance. Cabinet is also asked to homologate the decision to update space standards for short-term lettings. Members will remember that there's a statutory requirement for all local authorities to have established a short-term let licence by the 1st of October 2022. Members remember we submitted a Cabinet for the existing policy in October 2022. By short-term let, it broadly defines a business agreement to use residential accommodation, and most people understand that by Airbnb. The reason for the change is because of a court ruling that declared parts of the City of Edinburgh Council's policy unlawful. On the back of this, the Scottish Government amended the elements of their existing guidance, which required us to change our policy too. The two main areas you have to look at is space standards. Now, the original guidance permitted local authorities to use the Housing Scotland Act, and specifically many local authorities used the same standards used under the Housing Multiple Occupation. The Scottish Government has since revised their guidance to say that they feel the use of housing multiplication guidance is too extreme, essentially, and are requiring local authorities to look at some flexibility. Therefore, our new policy suggests that while we use the existing legislation as a baseline, we will take a risk-based approach. So where properties don't meet those space standards, we will work with colleagues in environmental health to assess the risk of those properties, essentially, therefore making a more flexible approach. Due to timescales of when that guidance was submitted, we were not able to present this ahead of the 1st of October deadline. Therefore, we sought homologation for this paper and spoke to Councillor O'Donnell and Councillor Devlin. The additional element was around additional conditions. We are allowed to put additional conditions on the licences, and that can cover a range of things. Many local authorities passed those conditions across all properties and all conditions, but parts of the ruling of the Edinburgh ruling suggested that parts of that were unlawful to apply everything to every property. So we have looked at what the main issues are being presented, and for us our conditional conditions remain as hot tubs where appropriate, waste disposal and antisocial behaviour. We will look at other issues as they come up, but we are reducing the additional conditions. We have consulted with short-term licence owners in the area who were supportive of our approach, so I'm happy to recommend this report.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. Any questions?
Yeah. Very briefly, I think you touched on it about, I'm aware of, I think there's other legal challenges ongoing, and do you anticipate, well, as a result, we may or may not have to amend the policy again in the near future, possible?
It's a watching brief. So the Scottish Government amended the guidance based on the recent legal challenges. We will continue to use Scottish Government guidance. We were approached by a couple of owners ahead of this change, which is one of the reasons we're bringing this paper forward, which was specifically around space standards. So at the moment we've had any submissions we are processing, and no further legal challenges or issues with their policy. If it changes again, we will potentially have to bring it back to Cabinet.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks for sharing this with myself and Councillor Devlin in advance of the deadline. So if there are no other questions, can I ask Cabinet to A, note the timescale changes associated with extended application deadlines, B, homologate, managed to say that in one go, I'm pleased with that, the decision to update space standards for short-term lettings, and C, approve the updated short-term lets policy. We agreed with that? Thank you very much. Thank you, Suzanne. So moving on to next item on the agenda is item number 7, update on the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund report by Director of Environment. But I think Michael McKernan will be taking this one.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. The purpose of the report is to update members in relation to the progress and implementation of the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund, known as LACER, within the council area, which was awarded by the Scottish Government in February 2022. The February 2022, the Scottish Government announced a new £80 million COVID Economic Recovery Fund aimed at supporting businesses and communities to help Scotland as it moved to a new phase in the coronavirus pandemic. Following on approval of the distribution methodology by COSLA leaders, East Rhine Council was awarded £1.46 million to be used to support COVID economic recovery, and these funds were to be fully committed by the end of March 2024. On the 18th of August 2022, Cabinet agreed a three-tiered approach to this fund to provide an appropriate balance of support to the local economy as well as low-income households. And the three tiers were to support businesses who were linked to low-income households, support businesses who were most adversely affected by the pandemic, and finally to support low-income households who were most affectly impacted by the pandemic. As you'll know from the previous Cabinet, was a call for proposals through a desktop assessment, etc., then approved by Cabinet. Annex A of this report provides a mix of outcomes across the three criteria specified. In total, 19 projects were approved by Cabinet on the 18th of August 2022. Of the £1.46 million awarded, £1.27 was spent by the end of March 2023, and £174,000 is committed to be spent by the end of March 2024. And there's been some reallocation of underspend within the programme of £20,000 to ensure maximum full spend of the programme. In conclusion, the funding has provided much needed support to our local businesses as well as local residents who have been adversely impacted by COVID-19 as well as the cost of living crisis. As we've noted previously, Appendix 1 provides progress against those projects which were supported by the fund. In terms of recommendation, the Cabinet is asked to note and approve the update provided and on the delivery and spend linked to the LACER fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Any questions on this? No. Michael, I really welcome this report. We asked at the time to come back with the results and a huge amount of impact on that. So very well done to you and the team for getting this done. As you say, big impact on local businesses and local residents, and very, very welcome. So thank you very much for that. I do have one specific question, and it's one of your underspends, is really Scotland Loves Local. So that there's still quite a significant underspend there. So a couple of questions related to that, and I think you're already promoting on social media. So a question is, how do we maximise the benefit to residents and businesses of this before it ends, and what happens at the end of the 12-month period with any cash that is unspent, please?
Okay, so in terms of the first point, we are doing targeted campaigns because it's also through the company who are actually delivering the local card, we know which households haven't actually spent the money. So we'll then directly target them with letters, etc., and we'll continue to do the comms message out to both local residents but also to local businesses as well. In terms of the second question, I think that's probably a discussion we probably need to have with Margaret McCrossan in Finance in terms of what then happens with that unspent. So I think we'll come back to you on that with more detail.
Perfect. I look forward to that. So, Michael, thank you very much for that explanation. And again, thanks very much for the report and for coming back to us with the results of the original projects. Much welcome indeed. So, with that, can we go to the recommendations of the paper? Hopefully I'm in the right recommendations here. Yes, I am. And the Cabinet is asked to note and approve the update provided on the delivery and spend associated with the LACER fund. We agreed with that? Agreed. Thank you very much, Michael. So now moving on to item number 8, which I think is Michael again, is Local Discretionary Fund 2, Request for Further Business Growth Interventions. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you. So, Local Discretion Fund 2, Request for Further Business Growth Interventions. The purpose of the report is to provide Cabinet with an update on the progress of the implementation of the Local Discretion Fund programme, which was approved by Cabinet on the 13th of October 2022, and to seek approval for further business growth interventions for the use of the remaining funds. So, as part of the Scottish Government's ongoing response to the COVID pandemic and our economic response, an additional £1.25 million was awarded to East Rhine Council via this particular programme to support local businesses. And as I mentioned previously, the initial raft of support was approved by Cabinet on the 13th of October 2022. The programme has been implemented from December 2022 and currently supports businesses up until the end of March 2024. Agreement has been recently agreed through COSLA that unspent funds can be carried forward into the next financial year until the end of 2025. The programme has strict eligibility criteria and a robust due diligence process for assessing each grant application and award. That produces a clear audit trail of application, documentation, spend and decision making as well. As at the end of July 2023, the programme has achieved the following: has engaged with over 160 businesses. Total amount spent to date is 198,438. We have allocated a further 417,562 to 80 businesses, meaning still to be committed £638,281. We also secured additional business admin support. We have carried out a lot more networking events to promote our offering to the local business community, as we have, in terms of obviously the immediate impact on local businesses, safeguarding 59 full-time equivalent positions, and then we'll support up to 115 full-time equivalent jobs within 3 years. Also has a positive impact in terms of support to local businesses, with a forecast to rise within the next 3 years in terms of turnover from £4.3 million to £8.4 million. So in terms of the report, we are seeking the continuation of the current programmes, which includes special growth grants, Get to Zero grants, etc., but also looking to bring in and introduce new proposed activities such as the New Start grant, Enhanced Digital Boost activity, the Accelerator programme and the new Enterprise Academy programme. In conclusion, the proposals presented fully allocate the balance of 638,281 across a range of strategic measures and interventions to support more local businesses in a more strategic manner. Also delegate to the authority to the Director of Environment to reallocate any of the funds, if required, between the proposals set out in the report, which will ensure a full spend of this award from the Scottish Government. In terms of recommendations, Cabinet is asked to note the activity to date on the Local Discretion Fund programme and agree to additional activities to use the remaining funds as set out in the proposed interventions within the report.
Thank you very much, Michael. Any questions on this? Councillor Anderson.
A comment really. Thanks, Leader. Michael, just delighted to see this. I think the paragraph 10 in particular, the numbers there, and the last one, in terms of the turnover, potentially the forecast within the next 3 years, pretty much doubling the businesses. I think it shows you the impact it's having, the number of full-time and positions and support, another 115 within 3 years. It's just great for the area, and I think it's exactly what the impact that you would want this type of funding to have. So that's a comment really, is just to say excellent. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Michael, again, really welcome it and the impact. Just standing back for a moment, what are you most pleased with? Obviously, there's a lot of different schemes that we're applying the funds for. What has really surprised you on the upside in terms of impact?
So in terms, I think probably a bit of a history in terms of our previous offering to local businesses prior to the Local Discretion Fund. So we had a very limited pot of money. That was primarily via European structural funds, and in particular the European Regional Development Fund, as well as our micro grants. So that was approximately £40,000 per annum, so a quite small amount of money. Now, ordinarily, those combined projects would be looking to support 10 to 15 businesses. However, we're looking to support 165. So I think, in terms of the reach of local businesses, we've really been able to attract in more businesses, have more discussions with them, and our offering as well. So I think with more money, we've also been in dialogue with Business Gateway, the Chamber, the bids, etc. We've also done a post-pandemic survey to local businesses in terms of how could the South Council support them more moving into recovery. So we've then looked at a local level. We've also looked at regional and national policy as well, particularly around Get to Zero. So we've been able to introduce our Get to Zero grants, our growth grants, also our Get to Zero Green Jobs Training grants as well. Part of that success has also been having an increased marketing budget, so obviously we can connect with more businesses as well. We've had a lot more regular funding events and business networking events as well, such as like BAM, etc. as well, we had up at the Rugby Club. So I think that's been sort of critical as well in terms of that. Now, I think in terms of ourselves, having that financial offering has been a very, very good hook in actually engaging and obviously supporting businesses as well. We've also listened to the local business community. We've then been able to shape our provision to meet their needs as well. We've also streamlined the application process, particularly for the micro grants, obviously that sort of scale. So that's been positive as well. And I think really, probably even going back to sort of prior to this fund as well, our team were obviously responsible for the administration distribution of the COVID grants. So we've been able to engage with more businesses, improve that partnership, and this fund has then allowed us to then continue with that.
It sounds like a huge amount of success. What happens after this fund? Are we expecting local discretionary fund 3, or is this the end of it?
That will be the end of it. So what we're doing really from November this time is we'd actually start prepping our 3 facets of the team. So in terms of employability, business growth, as well as communities in place, we're actually then starting to prep for a UK SPF2 programme 2025. So that would help inform any future local investment plan.
That's helpful to know. So it migrates into a different type of scheme over time. One specific question on a new initiative, New Enterprise Academy programme, which I'm sort of seeing as almost like an incubator type approach. I've been involved with a number of incubators. They're quite tricky to get right in terms of the right proposition for the businesses that we want to attract them, and they also take time to build up. I noticed this is only 12 months, so is there a possibility of extending that into a longer period, because 12 months goes by very quickly for very young businesses? So that's the sort of first question. And then second, I know it's Business Gateway that's supporting, and I think elsewhere you talked about Barclays, and I know RBS Business Accelerator have been doing a lot of work with brand new startups. So are we connected with them as well?
Yeah, so in terms of the timescales, yeah, we also sort of looked to, I think we were doing the proposals as a proposed, time period. So we'll really be responsive to the needs of the local businesses, and if it's required to extend, funding permitting, then we'll do that.
And links with RBS and Barclays, is that ongoing?
Yeah, so our Business Gateway guys have got good links with those, industry specialists, practitioners, etc. So they'll come into the fore as well to give them that overall comprehensive support package.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. Very encouraging news for the business community. A lot of work to build up those connections locally, which is important to everyone that we do that and contain that. And obviously we don't want to go off a cliff edge at the end of this fund, and we want to find new funds to enable us to continue to support and help our businesses thrive. So if we're happy to move to recommendations, and Cabinet is asked to A, note the activity to date on the Local Discretionary Fund 2 programme, B, agree to additional activities to use the remaining local discretionary funding as set out in the proposed interventions in paragraph 9, and C, delegate to the Director of Environment to vary the amounts allocated under each programme based on the level of take-up, and to ensure full spend of the Scottish Government allocation. And, almost missed D because it's on another page, D, agree to extend the programme of activities until the end of March 2025. We all agreed with that? Thank you very much, Michael. Cheers. And that ends our meeting for today. Thank you very much.